going on, whether we admit it or face it or we don't. American empire is over, and we ought to be paying attention so we can try to avoid catastrophe as we decline. You can go out with agreements that allow everybody to have their chance. We were never the only player, and now we can't even pretend, however desperately we try. Folks, there is no contest anymore. It's over. There is a new major player in the world, and they're having a conference right now that should be the single most important issue on our front pages, on our social media, because this is changing everything. Every country, every business is calculating, whoa, where do we shift our investments? Where do we try to source our inputs? Where do we look for markets in a changing world that has now really reached an inflection point, a big shift? That's a momentous transformation. It means that the center driving dynamic part of the world economy is no longer Europe, North America, and all of that. That has moved on. The dynamic of capitalism, which started in England and then moved to other parts of the world, which started in New England in the United States, Western Hemisphere, and then moved on. You know where it's gone now? To Asia, and it is on the route to going to Latin America and Africa too. The world is changing very fundamentally. We are living, as I said a half hour ago, at a time of enormously profound change. And our job as Americans is to stop behaving childishly in this game of thinking that the problems I've barely sketched don't have to be worried about, because we can continue to act as if we were in charge in the way we were in the 1960s and 70s. We aren't. Nothing like that. This is momentous. It is, for example, more important economically that is being understood or discussed or even admitted by both of our major candidates for president. Why is it important? It's important because this is now a conference of the most important economic bloc in the world. That is no longer the United States and its major allies, usually called the G7. By the way, the 7 stands for the United States plus Canada, Japan, Germany, France, Italy, and Britain. Those used to be the dominant players in the world economy. And above all, of course, the United States, which has been dominant among them since the Second World War, when it destroyed pretty much all of the others. Now, the reality is that since the year 2020, the BRICS are a larger player in the world economy than the United States. What the United States is doing is typical. Denial has always been there. You can travel to Britain today and encounter no small number of people who still imagine that the British Empire is still there. Witness the inauguration ceremonies for King Charles, who's the king of nobody. What we know about the history of every other empire that also grew, was powerful, and then died, was that the ride up as you're growing is a lot more fun and pleasant than the ride down when you're dying. The ride up was the 20th century, which many of you, like me, lived through. We now have to figure out how we descend when our empire is dying. It really is extraordinary, folks, that what you have thought about and assumed is now over. And it takes courage, but also a sense of realism to say now we are going to talk honestly about our situation and try to find a livable way forward. The alternative, well, I don't want to spell it out. You can figure it out for yourself. But I hope you will not hold against me that I have told you how this situation really is, rather than comforting you with more denial. But if I have failed, which I understand I may well have, then I have good news for you. If you want to wallow in denial, just turn on the radio and the television, and this evening it will all go away as you get told that the great issues of our time are those carefully excluding everything I have told you. The existing BRICS are meeting in Kazan, Russia. They meet in a different country each time they get together for a BRICS summit. Let me give you a second statistic that drives it home. We are in the year 2024. The International Monetary Fund, a creation of the West, of the United States and the G7, which shapes monetary policies around the world. The International Monetary Fund keeps track of how GDP, total output of goods and services, is growing each year. So I decided to show you what I mean by looking at what the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, has to say about rates of growth this year, just to show you that what I'm describing is underway. If you add up the BRICS, even only just the first five, you add up their GDP, the total output of goods and services that they achieve each year, in 2020, it became, added up, bigger than that of the G7, the United States plus the other six added up. All right, we'll start with the United States and try to keep that number I'm about to give you in your mind. GDP growth, according to the IMF, for the United States will be 2.8% in 2024, the year that's almost over. We know what it was the first three quarters, so we're estimating the fourth quarter to get that number. And that's what the IMF has given us, 2.8%. Let me look at the other G7s that usually drive that part of the world, Japan and Germany. You put them together, you know what the rate of growth is of the two together? 0%. Germany is in recession, below zero, minus. Japan is just above zero. So you put them together, and we're really low. 2.8 in the United States, nothing in Japan and Germany, and the others are small. Now I want to go to the BRICS. South Africa is like Japan. It's growing, but quite slowly. Brazil has the same growth rate as the United States, 2.8% for 2024. But now we get to the big players in the BRICS, Russia, China, and India. So again, let's remember the United States, 2.8%. What is the GDP growth in Russia in 2024? Yeah, Russia, the country fighting the war in Ukraine. Russia GDP growth, according to the IMF, 3.9%, way more than the United States at 2.8%. Russia, 3.9%. Now let's look at China. There we go, 4.8%. U.S. is 2.8%. China is growing almost twice as fast at 4.8%, which is low for China. And then we come to the winner this year, India, which is growing at 7%, almost 3 times the rate of growth of the United States. Economic growth for the United States, 2024, will be 2.8%, right on target with what it's been on and off for a long time. So now every country in the world, every company in the world is reassessing and redesigning its strategy for the future. And what do I mean? They're redesigning because the dominant player in the world of the last 70 years, the United States, isn't the dominant player anymore. There is a bigger player, richer player in the BRICS, which means if you're going to build a railroad in your country, you don't just go to Washington or London or Paris. You may go to them, but you're going to ask them what offer they can make, and then you're going to compare it to what you can get from Beijing, New Delhi, and Sao Paulo. And in case after case, the choice is made to go with the BRICS, not the West. This is an amazing, lax approach. You know what it looks like? Well, let me change that. You know what it is? It's denial. It's putting your hands in front of your face and hoping that if you don't see it and you don't talk about it and you don't admit it, well, then maybe it's not there. The BRICS is the agenda we need to learn. Otherwise, we will stumble into one disaster after another. Ukraine and Israel, Palestine, ought to be warning signs of the kinds of mistakes you can make when you think you are what you no longer are. Take heed. The alternative is something you don't want to have to face. I do believe we are at a major transition point in the history of the United States and probably of the whole world. I know that sounds grandiose, and I don't normally talk in grandiose terms, but the situation calls for it. And as I say, I'm not going to shrink away from why I think this. The next time you hear an American politician or you read in an American newspaper how the American economy is doing better than anyone in the world, please remember the word denial. That kind of statement, which I encounter almost every day, is the exact equivalent of a toddler putting fingers in front of her eyes or nose and hoping that the scary dog will go away.